I'm Veronica Marshall at the Capitol. This week on Senate Spotlight, there's some good news for some of Minnesota's most vulnerable members.
There's no cuts off of what they were getting. Nobody's money is going down.
Senator Abeler explains what helped the Human Services Policy Conference Committee balance its largest reduction ever, cutting $1.090 billion from its budget while still serving the people who rely on its services. And what does legacy mean to you?
Preservation of our environment, clean water, our airs as well, and also arts and culture.
The author of the state's Legacy Omnibus Bill details some of the changes you can expect to see. Plus,
it was rough getting this over the finish line. We did it.
Over the finish line and into polling places across Minnesota, the impact this year's state and local government and elections omnibus bill will have on voters. That's all coming up.
Senate Spotlight is produced by the Minnesota Senate and Senate Media Services.
With 101 Democrats and 100 Republicans, the legislature's tight voting margins have resulted in a delayed budget bill. But legislative leaders say, while negotiations are slow, they're working.
These pieces of these bills that make up the budget have been fiercely negotiated and represent real progress.
If a budget deal is not signed into law by July 1st, the start of the new fiscal biennium, state agencies will shut down. Layoff notices have already been sent out to hundreds of nurses, and at least another 20,000 state government workers could be impacted by the next round of layoff notices, which will go out early next week.
Aging and disability services, behavioral health, and direct care and treatment. The Human Services Policy Bill details the changes made to all of those subject areas this session. Joining me now is Republican Senator Jim Abeler, who says the changes impact more than just policy, they impact people. Senator, welcome back.
Well, good to be here on a rainy day in Minnesota.
Yeah, it's not raining in here. It's the best we can do.
There you go.
All right, Senator, there was a lot of concern early on in the session of how the state's budget woes would impact human services. Now that the services policy bill has been approved by the governor, how did we do? Were those concerns founded?
Well, there's two bills, actually. There's the policy bill, which was pretty well worked out. It wasn't very controversial with Senator Hoffman and Senators Neuer and Schumacher and myself. But then there's the budget bill, where they asked us to reduce spending in human services by $1.090 billion, which actually is the largest reduction ever. We did a similar one in 2011 of about $1 billion. And so it was very difficult. And a lot of us felt that was a disproportionate share to put on this arena. But nonetheless, that's what the decision was. And we worked really hard together to put together a budget bill that will at least do the least amount of harm to the least amount of people. It was very hard.
Well, and Senator, you've long been an ally for people who rely on disability services. So, knowing that there was such hard work ahead, how did it feel being their voice at the table? Yeah. And so somebody asked me that. Do you listen to the lobbyists and with their concerns? Actually, I listen to my own head because I've been in office 26 years and the people keep sending me back, so thank you for that. But it's a privilege and a great responsibility in times like this. It takes everything I know to try to come up with a really fair plan that can actually work. The governor's initial budget was in the same range as this final number that we came up with, but he had some very serious cuts to nursing homes, some very serious cuts to programming that would happen right away, and even taking money, reducing budgets of some of the service places. And there was a giant county share, which would have been a big property tax increase. And so I thought that was a really bad idea. And so working with Senator Hoffman and Representatives Neuer and Schumacher, we grittingly, hard fought, came up with a plan that actually doesn't cut anything, but just changes the trajectory of growth, like in the future, which was much softer on the individuals who could have come to great harm. Yeah, speaking of your colleague, Senator Hoffman, he said the bill is flexible, it focuses on program integrity and efficiency, there's modernization in there, and it expands substance use disorder treatment options. So that's how he summarized it. How do you summarize it?
Well, that's fair.
It's definitely retrenchment. And so when, in most cases, the money that we have is doubled by the federal government, which, by the way, has tons of money. I mean, $36 trillion in debt. Not to worry. Like, holy cow. I was worried when it was $10 trillion, but 36. We pay $1 trillion a year in interest. You know that? Anyway, so with the federal funding, the $1.09 billion becomes $2 billion of impact on the industry. So it's not inconsequential at all. But so we were able to limit the growth. That was the great compromise in both nursing homes and in the disability waivers to the CPI, the urban version, with a cap of 4%. And that's as deep as I'll get in the weeds for your viewers. But that's significant, but that actually generated about $900 million of savings, $1.8 billion impact on the industry for future monies coming to them. But hopefully they can work around that and not cause anybody any harm. But there's no cuts off of what they were getting. Nobody's money is going down, which it would have been in the bills that were brought to us from both the House and the governor.
I was going to ask about protecting taxpayer dollars. Senator Rasmussen said that this protects taxpayer dollars, which, as we know, is incredibly important at this time when the state has such budget constraints. So talk to me a little bit more about how the bill manages to do that.
Well, one thing it does is there's no county shifts. So the governor had $460 million in shifts to the counties, like a direct, like they can pay instead of the state. And the House had $580 million, which would have caused one of the largest property tax increases in this area, like in the history of time. And the Senate had $192 million. But I was able to work out some creative ways that maybe I'll get into to actually get rid of even that. But a shift to a county is a property tax increase. And it doesn't serve people any better, but it puts people, seniors and people with disabilities and just regular working families at risk to even lose their house because they can't afford their property taxes. So it does that. It also lowers the trajectory of spending by that $1.09 billion over the 4 years. But to be cautious, you don't want to reduce your gas bill so much your house is cold. You don't want to reduce the spending on your health insurance that you have no insurance and that you can't afford to go to the doctor. So there's a balance. If you go too deeply, the people with disabilities and the frail elderly could actually die. And so that weighed heavily on Senator Hoffman and on myself, both in 2011 with that big deficit and now as we faced a very similar problem to fix. So I'm happy to say that no one's going to come to harm as a result of our bill, and that's not easy to say, and we succeeded in that, so I was feeling pretty good about that.
Yeah, that sounds like a success. You seem very somber about the bill, but no harm to people, no cuts. That's something to celebrate, right?
Yes. And we could spend quite a bit of time, like, how did we get here in the first place? Maybe we shouldn't have spent all the $18 billion, and that could have been spent better, and it's hard to get that out of my head because a lot of this was unnecessary. The needs of the people with disabilities and seniors haven't changed. There is a chance to do some reforms and in the bill, and a few ways we're going to kind of tighten up on people getting in programs that maybe should be in a different, less expensive program, or they'll be served well. So all in all, it will protect the people to the best we can, and I'm happy about that part.
Okay. When I was looking at the Senate's bill side by side with the House's bill, I noticed that there were big differences on certain pages, extensive differences. So could you talk to me about some of those major differences between the bills and how they were resolved?
Yeah, and I'm trying to stay positive on all this stuff. The governor had a hard time putting a bill together to do what he had to do. With $460 million in shifts to the counties, that's just a way to balance the spreadsheet. I don't think they really wanted to do that, and it's a terrible idea. There are also some ideas where they would cut the funding right away, which is really not a good idea. And so I think that he mentioned something about, well, this is to get the discussion going, and so I took him seriously at that. One thing that we did in the Senate that made this work a lot better is I created some contingent rate cuts. We're creating a task force to sit down with 30 people who know this topic really well, parents, providers, some advocates, clients,
to how can we manage this? And so if they have to find $45 million, they have to find $90 million a year in some savings. Instead of just doing the savings right now, we are going to let them work on it a bit more and come up with a thoughtful way. We had a bunch of ideas about how to save money, and we didn't like a lot of them. They may have to come back to some of those, but at least they'll be done in a more open process. And so that's going to be a 3-year group, and they're going to work together and bring back some recommendations as soon as next year. You know, one thing that happens in conference committees is bad ideas don't get vetted very well. Like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then you put it into law and some things happen that aren't very good. One thing that came out of the conference committee in 2023 was reducing the rates of family foster care to a new system and affecting something called disproportionate share, which is where assisted livings, they take a lot of elderly waiver people in. We give them a little bonus because thank you for taking those people that are reliant on it, because we don't pay quite as well as the private sector. And so those are two ideas we had to kind of undo in this process. But you know, that's why you don't want to think of a lot of savings ideas you just kind of conjure up at this point. And so this task force is going to work at it. That itself will be interesting to follow, I think, for your listeners and for yourself. I'm excited about how that can actually maybe make the system work even better with a little less money.
Yeah, and it buys you time to see what happens with the economy. I think that's a really smart play.
Yeah.
House File 2115, the Human Services Policy Bill, had one of the best final votes I've seen for an omnibus bill this session. There were 55 votes in favor and 8 votes against. Did those numbers surprise you? And did you have to do any extra work across the aisle to achieve that?
You know, the funny thing, if you do a good job on the work, if you include people, you get a good product. With all respect to my Senate colleagues, they've had a hard time figuring out how to work together with us. As I've traveled the state for various campaigns and so on, you know what people want? Work together and get things done. They don't even always know the details, but they want us to work together. They figure we're here, we know some of the concepts, and could you work together? And I don't know why it's rocket science. And so if you look at some of the bills that are still stalled, or some of the ones that are having trouble passing, it's because they didn't work with us. Like, we're just that hard to work with. And actually, we were waiting. And so to credit Senator Hoffman and Representative Nur and Schumacher, they included all the conferees. The same way that there were conferees and others were included on the policy bill. That's how you do it. And so my commitment and Senator Hoffman's ongoing commitment is human services should not be political. It should be about the people. How do you solve their needs? You know, it's not in the Constitution. The Constitution calls for education, public safety, and roads, transportation. But this is like a cultural compact, like a social contract to look after seniors, the frail elderly, people with disabilities, and really care. We pay a lot of money for it. And the governor said, boy, they sure are expensive. I would say they sure are valuable. We better find a way to look after them in the best way. And I think this bill continues that effort. But I think, back to your question, if you work together, there's good ideas from all the sides. And instead of one side having ideas that are just not really good ideas, the other side, you work in the middle, between the 40-yard lines in a football metaphor. And so where people are generally comfortable with what goes on, and you stay away from the red zone, or the blue zone, which is what it's been lately. And so I think this bill and the one before it, the policy bill, is evidence of that.
Senator, you're known for your work in the human services arena, but you've authored other pieces of legislation this session. For example, one appropriating funds to stop the spread of the spongy moth, or one congratulating a Mankato Eagle Scout. So which has been your favorite piece of legislation this session?
Well, you know, you can take joy in every one. I actually had fun with the e-bike bill. And so we redid there was the e-bike rebates, and it took a lot of work, and it just landed on my desk. And so there was a program where you could get a $1,500 rebate on an e-bike if you just signed up. In 11 seconds, the money was gone. 1% of Minnesotans actually tried to get the e-bike voucher of the whole state. At 11 seconds it was spent. So we changed it up. And so we made it a program for low-income people with disabilities. And so now we reduced it to $750, and it's going to be a lottery. And so I'm kind of excited about that. And so
some people don't have a car, or they just don't get around. And I was shopping at Aldi, and this guy in the aisle had an e-bike, and he had a little basket in the back, and he was shopping in the aisle with his e-bike. It's like, how about that? Anyway, so that was fun. And it's in the transportation bill, and it's going to move along. And 3,000 people with a disability that make of modest income are going to get an e-bike. So that was pretty cool.
That is. Thank you, Senator. It's been a pleasure having you here.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me, and keep up the good work.
You too, sir.
Senators say Minnesotans can look forward to new measures that will strengthen election integrity and reduce government waste. These changes will come about thanks to the bipartisan and collaborative efforts that helped pass this year's State and Local Government and Elections Policy and Appropriations Omnibus Bill.
We did pass a number of really important measures that will protect voting rights in this state. There were some provisions that did not make it through the conference report, including the anti-bribery language, which was rather disappointing. But we did make some progress with some agreed-upon lobbying provisions that will help bring transparency to our elections.
Other key provisions in the bill include adjusting the deadline for absentee ballots. Now, absentee ballots must be submitted to polling places no later than 5 p.m. on Election Day. The previous deadline was 8 p.m. The omnibus bill invests in the Attorney General's office as well and enacts the Minnesota Business Filing Fraud Prevention Act. It also requires the Office of the Legislative Auditor, or OLA, to create a special reviews division and submit an annual report detailing whether an audited entity has adopted the OLA's recommendations. Just as a refresher, the OLA aims to strengthen legislative oversight, improve accountability, promote good management, and enhance program effectiveness by conducting financial audits of state agencies and examining the management and impact of state-funded programs. Senate File 3045 passed in the Senate with 36 votes in favor and 31 against. It then passed in the House and was signed into law by the governor.
Legacy can be defined as a gift. Usually it's a gift of money or property that's passed on to the next generation. Here in the Senate, when we talk about legislating legacy, we're talking about passing on and preserving the state's clean air and water, art, and cultural heritage. Joining me now is DFL Senator Foung Hawj, who says, by investing in our environment and traditions now, we're building on the gifts we're giving future generations and strengthening our legacy. Senator, welcome to Senate Spotlight.
My honor.
I know that sometimes senators join committees that they're interested in, and sometimes they're assigned to committees, and then they develop an interest the more they learn about it. So how did that process go for you? Was this something you were interested in, or was it assigned? And then what about these topics interest you now?
Yeah, it's something I'm interested in. As soon as I got on board, I thought about joining the Environment Committee, the Job Committee, and the Arts and Culture Committee, which fall under legacy, and I have my eyes on legacy for some time, and I'm glad that it's not just arts and culture alone, but it has 4 articles, one with outdoor heritage, clean water, park and trails, and then arts and culture, all 4 of which my heart is set for, and so it fall under the roof of legacy. And in committee, and every now and then as I reminded people that the Legacy Committee, the stakeholder, the predecessor designed a very good logo with park and trail, water, and the environment, and then also the arts component has a musical staff on that sign, and I keep pulling out that sign in committee every now and then. Also, when I'm at State Park, I always pointed to them that if you see this sign that has the musical staff, has the park and trail, has a fish on there, I'm part of that committee. And I'm not just part of that committee, I'm the chair of that committee, the Legacy Committee.
Senator, I like that you are legacy through and through, a real champion for it. And to that end, I know that you received an award for your work on parks and trails, and it was reported that since you joined the Environment Committee, the State Parks and Trails General Fund appropriation has increased every biennium. So how did you manage to do that? And talk to me about some of the accomplishments that came from those investments.
Well, I have to thank the surplus that we gathered, several years ago, and our amenity here in our state has not been updated for 30-some years, and so the park and trail improvement fall under the category of the Get Out More project and other specific appropriation like the lottery in lieu and all that. So it's not necessarily strictly into the legacy omnibus bill, which is, although there's one article about park and trail, but there's other surplus in the Environment Committee that we help appropriate to boost up the park and trail. And one particular is the Get Out More funding, which improve accessibility for people in our state, allow wheelchair accessibility, many means of accessibility, audio, visual as well, when people go into our state park. And that's needed, and in addition to updating our state park trails and amenity that has not been done for years.
Yeah, the outdoors and our legacy is for everyone, so that's really nice. When it comes to this session's work, you've said you're particularly proud of the community grants provision. So what is that, and why does it stand out to you?
Well, the community grant provision is under the Article 4, the community identity, arts and culture community, and it helped to preserve culture and also help fund arts program, arts project, and so it's very important to me. Prior to that, and let me take a step back a little bit. In 2008, we just formed a legacy bill through a constitutional amendment, and so over the year it has been quite popular, and no one have really tapped into the arts and cultural component that well, and it's been put into appropriation for competitive grant throughout time. And so over time, more and more people know about it, and people are applying to, and legislators are carrying bills to appropriate certain projects that are important to their district. And sometimes these projects find it hard to apply through competitive grant. Some of them have equitable situation where they can find a grant writer or other means, and so there may be smaller organization. So coming to your legislator to help out by identify and use political means to give you a little advantage that this project is really needed for our state. But we have to get the majority of the Senate and the House to support that as well. So that kind of weighed them from going to application process, which likely they might not get granted. But this allowed them some leeway, but not necessarily that we want them to come to us every year and year after year. We want them to, once they're able to stand on their feet, they can go and apply through the competitive level. So I'm glad that when I'm here at Chair Legacy, and since I've been in the Senate, the applicants or those who come to us at the legislature, the project that came to us at the legislature have grown in terms of community color and the underrepresented. So that number has grown, although we have not really reached 25% of the reflection of the diversity of our state, but it has grown more than the time that I began service here.
What do you think will be the biggest changes we see moving forward as a result of your committee's work this session?
This is a challenging idea, but We spent a lot of time this year debating which project should make it on the priority list or which project should get direct appropriation. And under the arts and cultural bucket, we already designate 47% to the Minnesota State's Art Board to do their own solicitation to arts community to apply grant from them. So that leave the other 53%, and some of them are direct appropriation to our Minnesota Zoo, our Science Museum, and some other project out there, NPR, Emperor Radio and such. So we need to reevaluate that and to see if we could make it more robust and also at the same time more transparent. So over the summer, I'm doing my own research and with some staff to see if we can create a better process within the other portion of the arts and culture, the 53% of arts and culture, how we can make it more robust and more transparent, and at the same time also allow legislative opportunity to help out organization or artists in the community to be successful in the grant consideration from legislation point of view, or through application through competitive grant from agency like Humanities Center or History Center.
Senator, what do you consider to be your biggest accomplishment this session?
Well, the goal of this session is to balance the budget, and I think we did well. We passed most of the bill before the end of the session. There's still going to be a special session, and there's just still a few other omnibus bills that need to be passed, including my environment omnibus bill, the legacy bill. We actually fought hard for that, and I'm glad that we passed that before the end of the session, but now we have to iron out the environment bill, and hopefully in special session we'll pass that as well. Certainly don't want any government shutdown, and I wasn't here when our state faced government shutdown, but I have experienced life out there and seeing how devastating it is during government shutdown, and all due to our political rhetoric that caused regular citizen, average citizen, people in Minnesota to suffer on our political ego, I suppose. And so things need to get done. And I'm glad that we are passing budget bill and balance the budget well, and balance the budget responsibly.
All right, Senator, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Both Senators Hur and Abeler had even more to say about their omnibus bills. You can watch their full interviews on our YouTube channel at MN Senate Media. That's all the time we have today. Thank you for joining us, and see you next time.